Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Evening Dhamma. Tonight we're looking at purification through knowledge and vision of the practice. So to recap, we've just gone through the knowledge and vision, discerning what is the path of practice and what is not. What is the path and what is not the path. So it's at this point that the meditator really begins to practice what we call vipasana. When we talk about vipasana, we mean this portion of the practice. Vipassana, as we understand it traditionally, is completely mundane. And by mundane we mean excluding nibbana, nirvana. Realization of freedom from suffering is not vipassana. Vipassana is the practice that leads one to freedom from suffering. Freedom from suffering is in the final purification. It's the true purification, really. This number 6 is still the preliminary path. And vipassana is still the preliminary path. So what does vipassana mean? Vipassana means to see clearly. Means clearly. Passana means to see, or seeing. Clear seeing. What are we trying to see clearly? We're trying to see clearly 3 things. These 3 things should be familiar to many of you. I talk about them hopefully quite a bit. Hopefully because they really are the key and they really are the essence of the practice. But likely I don't talk about them enough. You can never really talk about them enough. Impermanence, suffering, and non-self. We're practicing to see that everything inside of us and in the world around us is impermanent, unstable, unpredictable. We're practicing to see that everything inside of us and in the world around us unsatisfying, stressful, a cause for suffering if you cling to it. And we're practicing to see that everything inside of us and in the world around us is not ours, it's not me, it's not mine, doesn't belong to us, isn't a part of us, isn't ourself. 3 fairly weighty realizations. And I mean, they may seem actually somewhat simple at first glance, but they have some fairly dramatic repercussions, as a person will attest who is going through the insight meditation course. It has some profound impact on how we look at the world. I mean, first of all, because if everything is impermanent, then nothing is a refuge. Nothing can be your stable, secure refuge. It can't be there for you all the time. It's not something we can rely upon. Which may not sound too bad, but it's quite disconcerting when you start to realize this is the nature of reality. We rely very much upon stability. We depend upon it. Right? We live our lives trying to find it. We grow up thinking we have it in our parents, in our position in life, even in our bodies, in who we are. It's a very stable thing that we start out with until we start to experience suffering. We start to experience change and disappointment. We start to realize that the world isn't under our control. It isn't predictable. We're not sure what's going to happen next. This is where trauma comes from. People are traumatized because of the shock and the inability to deal with change. And I say change and I stick by it. Even suffering, great suffering, is a sort of a change. And if you suffer enough, long enough, it loses the shock value. But shock is due to an inability to accept change. And so this leads to a sense of dread, and the meditator begins to become quite uneasy about the things that we normally rely upon and think of as our refuge, our body, realizing that we can't even control our own bodies, our thoughts, our emotions, our experiences. Seeing firsthand that everything ceases is quite a disturbing experience. It takes us out of our comfort zone. And we begin to see not only that this is a sort of a scary state, but it's also quite unpleasant. The meditator begins to, as they progress through the practice, they begin to see the body and mind as, it's not the friendly, comfortable things one originally thought. The body begins to betray one. They see the body as the body betraying the meditator. Right? The stomach won't rise and fall like it's supposed to. The pains and aches in this and that part of the body. Not really working as it should. It feels kind of negative, unpleasant. And the mind as well. This crazy mind, no? I thought it was our mind. I thought this was me. You start to see how the body and the mind are conspiring against us. All these random thoughts and images and songs running through our head, movies playing behind our eyes. Memories we thought we'd long forgotten coming up again and again and again to annoy and distract us. Worries and fears about the future, any number of things. We start to see that the mind is not really the refuge that we thought it was. See a lot of suffering. A lot of suffering, and because we're clinging to the body and the mind, trying to make it stable, trying to bring it under control, expecting it to be like this, like that. And eventually the meditator becomes fed up with the body and the mind. I mean, it really takes patience because there's a lot of negativity generally associated with vipassana insights. A lot of negative experiences as we realize we're doing things wrong. It's negative because we're wrong. If we weren't wrong, we'd be enlightened. That's the whole point. The vipassana is to help us see what we don't see. And there are repercussions to not seeing, and that's what we start to learn. We start to see how not seeing that these things are impermanent leads us to take impermanent things as permanent or stable. Not seeing that phenomena are stressful, suffering, a cause for suffering, leads us to cling to them and think they're going to make us happy. Not seeing that phenomena are non-self leads us to take them as self, controllable, me, mine. All of this leads us to suffer when they aren't as we think they are. There's a lot of negativity involved, because we're wrestling with our old wrong views and wrong ideas about reality, wrong perceptions about phenomena. But through patience, the meditator begins to give things up, begins to let go, get fed up. No, I'm not going to cling to these things. These things aren't worth clinging to anymore. Starts to recoil and in fact become repulsed by experiences, thinking, if only I could be free from all of this. Feeling trapped. At some point in the practice, the meditator will feel trapped, want to run away. Sometimes meditators do run away. This isn't the same as running away a couple of days into the course. That happens because it's difficult. This is a person who is actually able to practice, who has broken through to vipassana practice and has really come to terms with a very deep problem inherent in samsara, and will often run away because, not often, but will sometimes run away because it's hard to admit that life is of this nature. It's easier to say, well, this is just because I'm meditating, right? This never happened to me before. It must be because I'm here in the meditation center. And often meditators who do leave will realize the mistake once they've left, because they didn't leave their problems behind them in the monastery. They get to take all their problems with them. You come here and you think this is such a dreadful place full of problems. It's actually quite a happy place. People come with their problems, but they have to take them home with them too. You don't get to leave your problems with us. We don't have any problems here. But if the meditator sticks with it, they realize it's nothing to do with meditation practice or the meditation center or the meditation teacher. No matter how awful the teacher is, it's not his fault or her fault. It's the fault of samsara. It's the nature of samsara. It's our fault, really, for misconceiving samsara to be something it's not. And the meditator, once they reach this point, then they're on the home stretch, because this is when the real practice, way near the end of vipassana, as they slowly work things out, and then they finally get it, and they say, look, I accept this is the nature of samsara. Then they get really down to work. And then there's this methodical going over and refining and saying, no, see, wrong. No, it's not satisfying. It's not stable. It's not controllable. And with enough of that, the meditator enters into the highest, the pinnacle of vipassana. Purification of the practice comes about when the meditator is finally objective. When the meditator gets to the point where they see all phenomena as equal, simply arising and ceasing, no judgment. Pain isn't bad, pleasure isn't good. Sights and sounds and smells and tastes and feelings and thoughts are all phenomena that arise and cease. It seems kind of insipid or dull or dreadful even. In fact, nothing can be further from the truth. It's at this point where the meditator is living, is here, is present, is no longer caught up in what it could be, how it should be, how it was, how it will be. They're here and now. And they're so alive, and so free, and so peaceful in the mind. So clear in the mind, with a perfect vipassana practice that they can penetrate this cloud of ignorance, see things as they truly are, and become free from suffering. It's a very quick, abbreviated version of the vipasana practice. There's a whole list of knowledges that I've just gone through fairly rapidly, and purposely, because learning about the knowledges can be quite detrimental. It's quite common for people to want to investigate and study, and if they hear about this practice of vipassana, they immediately go and find all the theory, and that can be quite to the detriment of the meditator. Because as I've said, they then expect or anticipate or intellectualize the practice. If you've never gone through the course, it's hard to understand the difference between intelligence and wisdom. But there's a vast chasm separating the two. They're quite different. So it's important that we never rely upon even teachings that I give that are intentionally focused around pushing people to practice, but that we actually practice on our own. Otherwise we end up just paying lip service to the Buddha's teaching, talking about it, not actually tasting or experiencing it for ourselves. But that's vipassana in a nutshell. Basically seeing the three characteristics. So if it's very difficult and you're seeing everything fall apart, well, that's what's meant to happen. The idea is to be left standing when everything falls apart, to not be shaken and have fallen apart, to rather be composed, and to learn to extricate yourself, to pull yourself out of meaning to not be dependent upon samsara. If it changes like this, I'll be happy. If it changes like this, I'll be unhappy. To be free from that. Not have your happiness depend upon the vicissitudes of life, the changes. It's quite liberating when you no longer rely upon things that are unreliable. Try to find satisfaction in things that can't satisfy. Cling to things that aren't you, aren't yours, aren't under your control. So there you go, that's the Dhamma for tonight. Thank you all for coming out. See if we can get to the questions. Looks like we can, it's working. Yes, we've got a bunch of questions tonight. Is the mind mine? To me it seems to be just another form of existence like the body, just not physical. And then the ultimate question, if I am not my body and not my mind, what is observing all that is happening in the body and mind? The mind is not yours, because you have to understand the difference between an entity-based view of reality and an experiential-based view of reality. If you look at reality from a point of view of entities, right, this room and everything in it, then of course I am, this is my computer, my microphone, my mind. But these are concepts, they're just entities. It's not really, it doesn't have any bearing on experience. In terms of experience, there is no me, there is no mine. It just doesn't, these are not concepts that play any role in experience. When we talk about things not being me and mine, we mean that experience doesn't work in terms of ownership. You can't own an experience, right? And experiences don't have existence independent of the chain of experience. They're a part of a causal chain. So when you talk about the mind, it doesn't actually exist. There's no such thing as the mind from a point of view of experience. There's only moments of awareness. And those moments of awareness are aware of things or have an object. So there's the awareness and there's the object of the awareness that are a pair. and the awareness and the object both arise and cease momentarily. So these questions only have bearing in regards to this conceptual view of reality, which is not how Buddhism looks at the world, because it's not useful. It's practically useful, if we go to the store, it's useful to know that we're talking to the clerk and so on, or when we go to school, talking to the teacher, knowing the people and places and concepts, getting on the bus, eating food. It's good to know what's what, entities are important, but only conceptually, only in a mundane sense. In terms of becoming free from suffering and freeing ourselves from suffering, it's not useful. These things don't actually play a part in that experience. Is it rude to ask advanced practitioners about their personal attainments or stage of the path? I don't know about rude, but it's interested to know where you are, and if so, obviously forget I asked. Knowing how far along someone is could help you decide. If someone has been practicing for 30 years and hasn't got anywhere, then maybe I may want to look elsewhere. No, I understand. I mean, rude is an interesting word. I don't really know how to respond to that. Rude to me signifies a person who has a disregard for another person's well-being. So there's usually anger or ignorance involved, and so it has nothing to do with the actual act and everything to do with one's state of mind. I find Western people can be quite rude in that they have expectations that don't have any consideration for the other person. I think that is a problem. I mean, it's a problem, not a Western problem. It's a problem with people who lack culture, I think, in general. I have a lot to say bad about culture and how it can be overbearing, but it often teaches you to be considerate of each other. I mean, it doesn't, but there is a consideration culture that is often lacking in modern society. I mean, if you look on the internet, there's an incredible lack of consideration. It's funny, in Thailand, I've heard many people say, problem with Westerners is you don't have a word for gengjai. They have this word gengjai, and my uncle, who's lived there for many years, said to me, yeah, in English there is no word for gengjai. And I said, of course there is. I'd thought about it myself. I'd heard this, and I said, of course there is. We just don't use it that much. We're just not very considerate. Often. I mean, it's not true. There are many considerate people outside of Asia, but it's a problem with modern society, and certainly with the internet culture. People want to rebel against this need to be considerate of other people's feelings. So there's this insult that people use, SJW, social justice warrior. And I've talked about this because to me, fighting, warrior is obviously a problem, but fighting for social justice can be a very good thing. And most people are not. There are people who are very militant and angry about it, but for many people it's just about being considerate. Someone has this outlook on life or this way of seeing, and you disagree with it, but you're considerate of them. You don't purposefully trod on the things that they're sensitive to, thinking, oh, they should just grow up and stop being so sensitive. Right? We should rather learn to be sensitive, compassionate, understanding. I mean, if for no other reason than because it's a much more profitable means of bringing people out of their sensitivity or their oversensitivity. Consideration is I think very important, and rudeness, I think, is a sign of low class and a sign of laziness in a sense. A person who just can't be bothered to actually take the time to understand the nuances of interpersonal relationships and the delicacy that goes along with trying to help people to heal and to become more stronger and so on. I think if anyone understands that, a meditation teacher understands that, because you're constantly trying to help people. And you can't help everyone, but you certainly don't help people by being rude and inconsiderate. It's not the question you asked. So is it... So I can't really answer in general whether it's rude, but I certainly can't answer these questions myself, and I think it often could be rude and inconsiderate by people who just, don't consider why it might be wrong. I mean, the fact that you have to ask, maybe you have to ask yourself, why would it be rude and inconsiderate? If you have to ask me, I mean, it's not me who's going to... And I guess this is the thing, is that rudeness isn't because I say rude of you to ask that. It's nothing to do with it. And this is what people rebel against. Because often they're saying, no, that's wrong, this is wrong. And they start to see how ridiculous it is. Like in Asia, it's quite like that in many cases. So many things. I watch the Thai lay people show the Western lay people, don't do that, that's rude, don't do this, that's rude. And it's funny because it's not really rude, and it's kind of rude to just push people. Okay, now you have to come and bow before the monk. I mean, how rude is that? I don't want people bow. It's not proper to tell someone you have to bow when they're not even Buddhist. For example. But the point being that if it's really rude, you will know for yourself. You have to ask yourself, is it rude? Am I being rude here? And if you don't know, then I can't tell you, because you have to learn how to be considerate, how to understand the other person's feeling. How are they going to feel about this? So I think there's a difference between culturally inappropriate, I suppose, and actually rude. Because there are, of course, cultural norms. You can't go to Thailand and just pat a monk on the head. That would be very culturally inappropriate. Might not be rude, although it's probably a bit condescending, but patting people on the head in Thailand, if you didn't know, is very, very culturally inappropriate and considered to be rude. It's not rude, though. It's not necessarily rude at all. Pointing to someone with your foot, it's a big no-no. I remember picking up a pen off the floor with my foot once, and one of the Thai monks said, "Oh, Western people's hands." He was calling me a monkey, basically, saying I was using my feet as a hand. Think of us as boors, and I mean it's important because in the tropics there's a lot of bacteria, so actually using your feet to pick things up is a very bad idea, because your feet tend to be attractors of a lot of diseases and bacteria, so there's reason for it. Now, I can't answer these questions because I'm a monk, and it's nothing to do with being rude. It has to do with the fact that it's easily exploited. If monks started to brag about their attainments, then it easily gets out of hand, because people want to support the monks. When we rely upon lay people for support, and then people support those monks who are attained, and then those monks who aren't start to lie about it, etc., etc. And those monks who are, become egotistical about their attainments, etc., etc. So it's a big rule. It's an important rule that we don't break. As for non-monks, to answer your question, I can see how it can be useful, but I don't think it's as useful as people think it to be useful. I mean, my teacher is clearly a very powerful person, and many people think he's an arahant and so on, but I don't see that helping a lot of people. That knowledge doesn't really... I mean, yes, it brings people to practice. For sure, it brings people to practice at his center, but the simple knowledge that he's this or that, or reached this or that attainment, I mean, no one really knows, because he doesn't say. He doesn't bring people. What brings people? What brings people is who he is. What people know about him, how they feel about him, how they feel when they're in his presence. and that doesn't take any admission. But even still, he always says, going to see enlightened people or being in their presence has nothing on actually practicing. And if the only reason why you would take up a practice is because someone else has attained something from it or says they've attained something from it, then I'd say you're barking up the wrong tree. You really haven't any reason to continue that practice. First of all, because the person could easily be lying or overestimating their own practice, but second of all, because it's meaningless to you. It doesn't actually psychologically do it, not nearly in the same way that actually practicing and realizing that the practice is beneficial. I mean, if you think about it, you don't need that sort of verification. All you need is to sit down and practice and say to yourself, whoa, this practice is really where it's at, or this practice is useless, either way. And if it's taking you a long time to come to either of one of those conclusions, then, well, probably it's the latter and it's useless. Practice shouldn't take a long time for you to see the efficacy of it. I keep having trouble keeping my back straight. I sit straight and then I start to slump down. Most of the sitting meditation, in between I do the mantras. My lower back probably isn't strong enough. No, you don't need to have a straight back. If you're slouching, that's fine. It is a concentration problem. With certain types of meditation, you have a great amount of power because you're very focused on one object, and so you can sit perfectly straight. Insight meditation of this sort isn't like that, and because you're letting your mind and body ebb and flow. So you won't have the power of concentration, at least not in the beginning. It's needed to keep a perfectly erect body. So it's something I wouldn't worry about. Would the Buddhists view the concept of desert? I think you mean desert, right? The idea of who deserves what, similar to that of merit, be considered as delusional? Would they think such a view is delusional because it's sustained on some... I don't understand. Desert, so a person getting what they deserve because it involves an enduring ego, right? The idea that the person in the past... I mean, it's just an imprecision, right? It's not actually wrong. You say, look, this person is sick, they're getting what they deserved. I mean, usually it doesn't happen in this life, but it can. I mean, quite simply, if you kill someone, the police are going to come after you. That's cause and effect. You're going to feel a lot of fear. You might even get physically sick, nosebleeds, that kind of thing. There's lots of problems that come from being an evil person. So to say that person got their just desserts, it's just an imprecise way of saying this cause led to that effect. I mean, yes, it's true that the person doesn't exist, but in a conventional sense, that person got their just desserts. I mean, we all do eventually, more or less. I mean, it's a bit more complicated than that, but generally speaking, we get our just desserts. Long questions. I'm rather suspicious of long questions. Warnings, comments on what order is it best to delve deeper? No, you can't. I mean, reading texts is not a supplement or is not a replacement for actual practice. You say there are no meditation centers of this tradition next in my area. Tough. I mean, studying books, it can potentially, but no, I mean, tough. I mean, it's an awful thing to say. Why I say it is because you have to find one. Maybe you have to leave your area. Yeah, that might be impractical now, but there is no real practical alternative. Reading books isn't going to do it for you. Not most likely. Possibly, very unlikely. I don't know. I don't want to say that it is possible. It just because everyone thinks they're special. Mahasi Sayadaw says this. He said, well, he basically said, paraphrasing a bit, he said, many people think that they are some sort of special individual. I mean, we all think we're kind of special, right? Maybe I can do it without help. Yeah, it's possible. Sure, it's possible. It's not very likely, though. I really recommend reading for those people who are also practicing. I mean, I've set up, if you've gotten this far, I'd recommend, hey, maybe doing an online course. We've set up this online course system whereby you can at least have a weekly meeting with a teacher. So you're welcome to take part in that. But I guess my point is I wouldn't worry too much about going deeper. I mean, you can't replace practice with a manual on the practice. It just doesn't work that way. And the manual on the practice can't supplement a teacher. The teacher keeps many things that are in the manuals from the students, purposefully, because it would it'd be putting the cart before the horse, giving the person the information before they understand it, before they're ready to accept it, and to understand the implications of it. So, I mean, you can be persistent, and if you're persistent, I would say read the Buddha's original teachings, because his teachings are purposefully fairly general, These later manuals, they go into quite detail, but the Buddha, when he actually taught students, a lot like, quite general, and so read his teachings, and it'll encourage you to practice. When I do sitting meditation, I'm very concentrated. I feel the need to swallow. But when I'm not mindful, I swallow automatically, because my eyes feel dry. Mindfully blink and mindfully swallow. Yeah, that's correct. How do you see dependent origination fitting into the material world? What does each nidana actually pertain to? Right after death and before becoming. I don't know. I don't really understand what you're asking. I have a few theories regarding the stages of development of a fetus. Well, I don't, that's not the way I roll. Mahasi Sayadaw has some theories. No, the Buddha had some theories. And if you want to learn the Buddha's theories, I really recommend you read Mahasi Sayadaw's book on dependent origination. But if you got your own theories, power to you. But I'm not going to get caught up in that. I'm a very much an orthodox sort of person. I follow the theories that people wiser than me have given, because because I agree with them, I suppose, but also just because I'm in awe I'm in awe at the fact that they are able to explain these. I don't have any bone of contention with them, so I don't have my own theories, and if I ever did, I would be rather suspicious of them and wonder where I was getting these theories from that were different from people who are clearly wiser than me. No, it's not a poke at you. I'm sorry, that might sound a bit like a poke. It's more of a reflection on my part, and I'm sorry if it sounds like I'm saying, hey, you're not very wise, and people like me or people like Mahasi Sayadaw are wiser. It's totally up to you. If you have your own theories, power to you. I'm not really, into alternative theories. And I may have a little bit misunderstood what you're saying. I just don't get what the question about how it fits in with the physical world. I mean, paticca is a thing. It has one interpretation, or, well, potentially two, this life or past lives, but it still is it's quite simple and clearly spelled out. It's not simple, it's actually quite complicated, but mosquito season, go away. I caught a mosquito. Did the Buddha ever describe his specific meditation techniques? Well, he talked a lot about anapanasati and mindfulness of death, mindfulness of the body, that kind of thing. So yeah, he did. We don't have a lot of it in the suttas. It's a lot more general talks. So we don't know whether there's any extra scriptural teachings the Buddha gave on actual mechanics of the practice. We kind of have the idea that way back then people were just so good at meditation you didn't have to go into detail. Whether that was true or not, I don't know. Probably not. But we hear a lot of stories about how the Buddha and his disciples would teach people and spend lots of time teaching them actual meditation techniques. So it's not all written down in the suttas, I think. Okay, I've got to go free this mosquito. That's all the questions. Thank you all for coming out. Have a good night.